At the close of the American Civil War, the Most Reverend Augustine Verot, Bishop of Savannah and Administrator Apostolic of Florida, visited his native city of La Puy, France, where he challenged the Sisters of St. Joseph to come to St. Augustine, Florida. In blunt and realistic fashion, he wrote, "I have 500,000 to 600,000 blacks without education, without religion, and without baptism, for whom I wish to do something. There is an immense field open to the zeal of our holy daughters, and if I do not mistake it, the good God is giving you a great grace by this choice." With the humble courage of their patron Saint Joseph, many sisters volunteered. Expecting to encounter the reality of deprivations, these brave women ventured forth on a perilous journey wholly dependent on God. Existing correspondence reveals their eagerness to embrace any sacrifice for the love of Jesus, who endured much more for them. They arrived in Florida at Piccolata Landing on the shores of the St. Johns River, September 2nd, 1866.
You're going to play the two parts. We'll take a person to be the interviewee and one now to run the camera. Okay?
What does civil liberties mean to you?
To me, civil liberties mean that all people are equal and free.
What does civil liberties mean to you?
Well, to me, it means that everybody's free and they're prancing around in this big, wide field. And they're all equal, and it's everything around us. It's kind of like the Matrix.
Okay, Hannah. What does civil liberty mean to you?
It means that everyone's the same. Nothing is different about us. It's just maybe one thing's different. Does that really matter?
To you, what does civil liberties mean?
To me, civil liberties means that in America we're free to make choices, to grow and to develop as equals.
To me, civil liberties means that all people are equal.
During the civil rights era, I guess I was in my early teens, 12, 13 years old. That was in 64, 65. I do remember the fact that as a child that some of the, I think there was a rule or regulation amongst the civil rights movement that you had to be 14 before you were able, you could participate in the sit-ins and go to jail. That was some of the some of what we wanted to do, but some of us were too young to really participate. So some of the kids who were my age just ended up telling them that they were of age and they participated. But I didn't. I told the truth, and I said, "Well, yeah, I'm 13." And they said, "Well, you're too young now to go to jail. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna make you a runner." And wasn't sure what a runner was, but I found out that what a runner did was a runner actually accompanied a group along to a demonstration, and when that group was arrested and taken off, the runner would come back to the church, maybe St. Mary's, First Baptist. I remember First Baptist in particular, and we would report what we saw and what had happened during the time that the demonstration was going on. And I remember one time in particular, I went along with a group. Each group had a number, I think group number 26 or 24 or something like that. And I sat across the street from Woolworth. At that time there was a long row of hedges, and the hedges had a little space in between each one of them. So I would sit across the street and sit in between the hedges, and I was kind of hunched in between the hedges, and I was watching as a lot of the tourists walk by. I could see their legs walking by in front of me. But across the street at Woolworth was where the demonstrators were inside, and you could see they were at the counter, and you couldn't really hear what they were saying, of course, where I was positioned. So I can see after a period of time, the police showed up, and then you can see there was a little discussion at the counter, and I didn't see any physical altercations other than them actually physically handling the demonstrators and pulling them out, taking them into the police cars and the wagon and taking them off to jail. So as soon as that happened, that's when, well, my job was to, get out on King Street, and I ran down to Cordova Street, took Cordova down to Bridge, and Bridge down to Washington, and went down to First Baptist and reported group number so-and-so was arrested, and let them know exactly what I saw. I guess basically what we were doing was kind of being the eyes and the ears, because a lot of times, back then, news didn't spread as fast as it does today with cell phones, and news doesn't travel as fast. So that was a way of getting the information back to where it needed to be, so they would know where the groups were, and also who was arrested, how many was arrested, and what time of day it had happened. So that was kind of a contribution that I made as a 13-year-old.
My full name's Kenneth Montier Barrett, Jr. My family moved to town in 1953, and Dad took a job with the National Guard as a commissioned officer at the Arsenal, right around the corner on Marine Street. And they rented an apartment at the Cordova Street Apartments, just down the street from where the St. Augustine Record was. Photographer since 1972. I was on the staff at Flagler College for 20 years. That's where I met Sister Diane. She was teaching stained glass, and in the accompanying studio we had a big dark room and a classroom for students. I was young at the time. I was a kid going to junior high. I took over the Lincolnville paper route when I was 12 in 1962, late 1962, when there were two paper routes in Lincolnville. I had Route 11, and my friend Bruce had the other route number. I think it was 12. And he threw most of Lincolnville west of M.L. King Avenue, which was Central Avenue in those days. But I took over the route in late 1962. I just turned 12. I was in the 7th grade, and that was my route. And it was a pretty large route. I had over 125 customers.
It was a nice place to go to school. It was a small classrooms, the Sisters of St. Joseph. They're the ones who taught here at the school, and they were very knowledgeable about the subjects they taught, and they were very concerned about us as students. So we learned a lot, and we also learned things other than just reading, writing, and arithmetic, so to speak. So that's some of the things that we were taught in the school here. But it was a small school, everybody knew everybody, and we were able to learn a lot. Students came here to kindergarten, but they didn't continue on to the rest of the grades. But the next room was the first, second, third, and fourth grade. And then if you go around to this other room on the other side, that was fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. So all of the grades were on the first floor. And then, and up on the top floor was the auditorium and the restrooms.
There's a sidewalk just in there.
So basically, this was a whole elementary, middle, high school.
So that's where you come back and say, okay, but then when you tell me your group, number 9, went to jail, I have a list of the names of each one of your group members. And that way I could call their parents and say, look, so-and-so and so, Jasmine went to jail, Ron went to jail, Jimmy went to jail, Alice went to jail, and then I let them know that they're
You went to jail.
oh no, I just pulled that name out of the clear blue, but let them know who went to jail. So that way we could let the parents know right away that their children went to jail, and not have to wait until the nightfall when they didn't come home and say, oh, they must have been in jail. So we didn't know right away.
Okay.
So you were in the Freedom March?
Yes, as a runner, like I said, a runner usually went along with each group, and that runner reported back to the headquarters when each group got arrested.
What was your most memorable event of the Civil Rights Movement?
The most memorable event of the Civil Rights Movement, of course, now you got to remember I was 13 years old, so I looked at it a little differently from some of what the adults looked at it at that time. So I remember going to Zion Baptist Church for a mass meeting, and we sneaked up the back way and came up through the pulpit and sat in the deacon's bench. Now there were at least 150, 200 people out in the audience in the congregation. But when we sneaked up the back way, we got the best seats in the house. We marched down to Slave Market. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but I was towards the back of the line, and they said a commotion that happened at the front of the line, but they held us up for a long period of time. But then come to find out later on that's when Andrew Young was leading the march, and he had gotten beat up at the front of the line. But then the state trooper came and kind of quelled the commotion, and the march proceeded, and we kept going. But we found out later on what had happened. I think Andrew Young was one of the famous persons in the civil rights movement, especially at that time and today.
Can you tell us what the school looked like back then?
Well, the school looks a lot like it does now, if you can imagine, with the windows. There was no porch on it when I was going to school, but there was a porch on it years before. It was well kept. It was red. I think it was red to the bottom and white to the top. We had quite a bit of activities in there. We had all of the 8 grades, well actually 9, because we had kindergarten and then the 1st through 8th grade. We had programs and activities going on upstairs in the auditorium. And then we had the playground, we had swings, we had merry-go-rounds out in the yard. So it was a lot of activity going on.
I can't really remember seeing a lot of activity for the Civil Rights Movement in '64. I do remember there being some groups of people walking up and down Central Avenue, my paper route. I did see Dr. King once speak to a group of people on a porch, And I believe he was speaking on to a group of people on Oneida Street from a porch. And I do remember there being 2 policemen there that day. But it was during my delivery of the paper, during my route delivery, so I didn't stop really, but I do remember that. But there was no negative, weird activity that occurred towards me or anybody else. We had a few minor scuffles at the record, but I'm not really sure what it was about during that time period. No one bothered me. All my customers were kind to me because they all knew me and I knew them. I'd been doing it for 2 years. I did have the editor of the paper, Mr. T-Bolt, and the circulation manager, Mr. Brock, drive me around in their cars on a few occasions when things got heated up in town, but we really weren't aware of what was going on. There wasn't a lot of local publicity in the paper about what was happening. The only thing I remember about the theater was coming out of the Matanzas Theater on Cathedral Place one Saturday afternoon, and there was like a full-scale fight going on in the plaza across the street. But I don't really remember seeing or hearing a lot of the things that were later that came up in the national and the international press. St. Augustine in those days was a city within a city, so you had the Lincolnville community, and then you had St. Augustine around it, and then you had the West Augustine community.
How far in steps would you say you had to run?
I say it was about maybe a mile, maybe a little more than a mile. But from King Street, we'd run down Cordova to Bridge to Washington, and then Washington over to St. Francis.
How did you become a runner?
I became a runner because I came down to volunteer to demonstrate and hopefully go to jail along with the rest of the crew, the group. But when they asked us how old we were, I told them that I was 13, and they said, well, you're too young. A friend of mine that was with me said he was 14, and they said, okay, you're okay, even though I knew my friend was not 14. He was 13 as well. But he decided to tell a little white lie, and he was able to demonstrate, march, and go to jail. But those who were under 14, 13 and under, we were considered as runners, and we would, each one of us would go along with the group and report back. So that's how I basically became a runner.
Why did you become a runner?
Why? Well, because I wanted to do something for the cause. And I had 2 older sisters that were involved as well. And those 2 older sisters, I kind of went along with them, and well, we all did it together. And I was encouraged by my mother to participate. And well, that was the job that we had to do.
Who were you with?
Who was I with? I was alone. Each group had 1 runner, so I was the only person with that particular group. Now there were other runners with other groups, so I pretty much had to run by myself.
Where did you go?
Where did I go? Well, one particular instance, I know I was sitting across the street from Woolworth department store at the corner of King and Avonlea Street. And I think now there's a marker across the street dedicated to the foot soldiers. But at any rate, that's where I remember there was a row of hedges along there, and those hedges were they had little areas underneath the hedges where a small person could kind of hide up under the hedges. So I would hide up under the hedges, and as the tourists would walk by, I would be looking across the street to see what happened. And that's where I would be positioned so I could have a good view of what was going on across the street.
What helped you get through the civil rights movement?
What helped me get through was the fact that At that time, a lot of people were involved in the movement, so we were able to fuel off of each other. When we went through the demonstrations, everybody kind of helped each other, so it was kind of like each person helped each other make it through.
Were you scared at all?
Yes. Well, I put it as a short answer, but to give you the story, a lot of times we weren't sure what was going to happen when we left some of the mass meetings. We would march downtown, and a lot of times there were individuals downtown who did not want us to march. So sometimes they had axe handles and baseball bats, and if we came down as a group marching, they would attack some of us with the baseball bats and the axe handles. And some would get hurt. But if we had a tactic where if one person was being attacked, we would all lay on top of that person and absorb the blows, and hopefully it wouldn't get one blow, one person wouldn't get too much. But a lot of times we would march downtown and nothing would happen. We'd go downtown, we'd march, and then come back. So you never knew what was going to happen.
In the civil rights movement, did you do anything like a hobby or anything?
A hobby?
Or like a sport?
I used to go fishing. We used to have little dances and things down at the Little Links, which is now the Gallimore Center. And we call them sock hops. And we would have someone that would spin records, and we'd go down and dance. Then there's also, we'd have, when you say sports, now I did participate in Pee Wee League football, and there was also basketball. So those are the couple of sports that I participated in.
At this location, on June 9th, 1964, civil rights movement leader Andrew Young led a march from Lincolnville to the Plaza de la Constitution, where they met violent opposition. Young had been sent to St. Augustine by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a close friend and fellow advocate, to organize a peaceful protest for human rights.
Andrew Young Crossing. Commemorating the June 9, 1964 March for Civil Rights into the Plaza and the courageous leadership of Andrew Young and the people of St. Augustine.
When Young left the group of demonstrators across the street to this location, he was beaten by a large white mob that had been waiting for the marchers to arrive.
Nonviolence. St. Augustine was probably the most rigorous test that nonviolence had, and we passed it. If we had not passed it, we could have lost the Civil Rights Act.
Young recalls being struck down several times in the melee. The activists, being true to Dr. King's nonviolent strategy, walked away. Civil rights historians agree that this was one of the pivotal events that eventually led to the passage of the civil rights legislation.
Equality. This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to eliminate the last vestiges of the injustice of our beloved country.
National press coverage of the protests in 1964 helped break Congress's filibuster on the Civil Rights Act vote. On July 2, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill into law. Freedom. This is your story as much, if not more, than it is my story. We have allowed the idea of nonviolence to work through us and transformed dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows.